Hello? Okay. Well, that was great, Andrew. Thank you. That leaves less of a preamble for me, so I really appreciate that. I'm Megan Shamus. I'm with the FIDO Alliance, and I'm responsible for our market adoption initiatives globally. So yeah, we're here to talk about the future of passwordless authentication. Specifically, we want to talk through real progress being made towards passwordless, and it's actually more accurate to say towards the use of less passwords. Now, I know people on Twitter are going to say I have bad grammar. It's fewer passwords, but it doesn't work. The password less and less passwords just works so much better. So I like to say less passwords, if that's okay with everybody. But it's really to be using less passwords in our everyday lives and our consumers and enterprises as well. And I think Andrew laid it out really well why that's needed. The write-up that is on the agenda says everyone agrees that we need to kill the password. So I'm not going to do the thing where I ask the room who hates passwords. I hope that at this point that everyone would raise their hand, please. But I think all the reasons why, and also some of the failures with legacy MFA, Andrew brought to light really, really well. So I won't go through all of that. So obviously FIDO has emerged as the sort of phishing resistant way to sign in across websites in a way that is much simpler for users. And Passkeys are really offer a new set of capabilities to FIDO that makes that even more so from a scalability and usability perspective. So that's what we're here to chat with you today, which is what's a passkey, what are we trying to accomplish, what's endgame here in terms of the passwordless future. And I'm really pleased to have these panelists here with me today who represent the perspectives from government, enterprise, consumer environments, and as well as the platform providers that are building these capabilities and have done so for Google already. So let me have them introduce themselves. And when they're introducing themselves, I've also asked them just to give a little bit of perspective on where they sit in terms of passkeys and passwordless. So Tim, you want to start?
Hey everyone, my name is Tim Capelli. I'm a standards architect at Microsoft. I live in the identity organization, but for the Passkey initiative, kind of working across both the platform and Microsoft as a relying party. There's a lot of things going on in the FIDO Alliance that touch on both, so work very closely with Christian and Megan and team as well.
Cool. Thanks, Megan. Hi, folks. I'm Christian Brandt. I'm a product manager at Google. I've been with Google working on FIDO and next generation password alternatives for almost 8 years now. It's interesting the way that we're set up. I have responsibility for representing us in the FIDO technical working group. I'm also the co-chair of the FIDO 2 technical working group. So working on the standards together with folks like Tim and others here, but then also working with our internal platform teams on implementing FIDO standards so other third parties and other developers can make use of these. So our big platforms are Android and Chrome. So implementing FIDO capabilities and passkey capabilities in those two platforms so that essentially anyone can use them. And then lastly, and this is the journey that we've only, I guess, recently, maybe the last year or so, really started to accelerate, which is how do we make use of passkeys and FIDO technology in our own Google products, right? How do we enable Google accounts to have passkeys instead of passwords? So that's really kind of like the final, I want to say, stage of our journey. We've worked in the standards organization for, as long as I've been at Google, started then moving the stuff over into the platform pieces, Android and Chrome, and now finally at the point where within this year, I think there will be pieces of passkeys that'll be starting to make their way into common Google products, and hopefully, start to proliferate that idea that, hey, this isn't only something for other third parties, this is really for everyone.
Hi, I'm Andy Regenscheid. I am a project lead for applied cryptography at NIST, and I come here kind of wearing two hats. I am one of the co-authors of the NIST Digital Identity Guidelines, including the volume on authentication and lifecycle management. But I'm also the technical lead for NIST's personal identity verification card standards program. So, between those two, that covers both the kind of citizen to government facing transactions as well as, how the government manages identity and authentication for our federal users, or our federal employees and contractors. In both of those use cases, having strong, user-friendly, and broadly supported solutions for authentication is critical. So, there's been a lot of really interesting, developments in that space for the past, really the past, 5-10 years, with Passkeys being, just one of the most recent examples of the things that we're trying to be able to take advantage of within the U.S. government.
Good afternoon. I'm Paul Grassi. I'm with Amazon. I'm a principal in our identity services group. I'm also co-chair of the identity verification and binding working group at FIDO. And then from a passkey perspective, I work in the consumer side. So that's obviously Amazon.com, but it's also a ton of other properties that Amazon owns across spectrum of businesses, to include high assurance use cases around health, as well as a range of retail, as well as some low assurance use cases, the IMDb's of the world. So we are we're very active in FIDO across all the working groups, not just the one that I lead. And we are eager to adopt passwordless or less passwords or fewer passwords here in 2023, and passkeys are a key component of that strategy.
Great, thank you all. I want to just take a quick temp check of the room. So how many people feel like they have a good grasp on passkeys? Like, have you heard of passkeys before today? Well, okay, that's one question. Do you feel like you have a good grasp on passkeys? Okay, that's less hands. Okay, that's what I wanted to know. So we're going to kind of take a step back through sort of how this all came about, and then we'll talk about some like specific use cases for passkeys as well. But so the first question that I'm going to ask Tim to start with is, what is a passkey?
Okay. Yeah. So a passkey we can think about in two ways, right? One, we can think of a passkey as a credential type, like a password, like a certificate, like an OTP, right? The name of a credential, password, passkey. I did a test with this on with my mom, and I was like, if you heard the word passkey and you were signing into something, what resonates? She's like, oh, I probably use that to sign it. So just the word association, great name, very quick for people to absorb when they see it. And we think it'll, the fact that when we started talking about it, people kept saying it nonstop when we didn't want them to, kind of sold it as this works. So it's a credential type at its core, and then it's also a set of experiences. So if we talk about the credential type itself, right, we've always had this thing called a FIDO credential or a WebAuthn credential or name X other thing that people call it. There's a large electronics retailer in the US, which is a very early adopter, which was really amazing. But the button said like sign in with WebAuthn. And like what user knows what that means, but they didn't have any other choice. What else are they going to call it, right? You can say sign in with Windows Hello, but then you have to do platform detection, all this mess of things if you've done web design to try and detect what device you're on, right? It's just not a great experience. And so there's that. So the name itself, right? Giving something a user-friendly name is super important. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in depth. But the actual credential itself, right? One of the challenges with WebAuthn, FIDO2 credentials, name it however you choose. Let's use Windows Hello for Business since I'm here for Microsoft. It's great once you get it set up, and then when you get your new device, you have to do that all over again, right? For consumers, it is hugely problematic. Getting a new device. The experience that I always compare it to is I have like 5 cards of credit or debit or whatever, and I get annoyed resetting up 5 cards on my new phone. Imagine having to do that for all of your online services, right? It's not a scalable solution. My mother would never do that. My siblings that are not technical would not do that. There's absolutely no way that would scale. And that's why we saw decent market adoption of FIDO, but it didn't penetrate into consumer where we want it to be. So being able to now take that credential and back it up similar to the experience users have with passwords, right? If you do use a password manager, when you set up a new device or you add a new device kind of to your circle, everything's there and ready to go, right? That just did not exist with FIDO2 WebAuthn credentials before this initiative. So being able to do that in a secure manner, take advantage of existing technology in the platforms like end-to-end encryption and the hardware level security of the platforms, the time was right to actually now plumb together a solution that actually was usable for consumers. So that's the credential itself. And then if we think about what we call the passkey experience, right? There's a lot of things out there that have implemented bits and pieces of what we call the passkey experience, but it's not the whole thing. And the whole thing is really important. So we can think about the credential itself, obviously being able to use the credential. The other one is being able to use the credential by itself. So if you're familiar with the security key experience, in most cases, right, there's obviously some exceptions, you generally have to enter something in first, type something in, whether it be a username or more commonly username and password, then you can use your security key, right? That's a lot of clicks, a lot of steps. And so being able to take advantage of the property of a passkey, which is called a discoverable credential, means that it's actually available in the authenticator without you having to provide any information to the site up front, right? So from a privacy standpoint, that's really awesome. And also from a usability standpoint, it's really awesome. So that's one piece. The other piece is being able to use a passkey on one device to sign into something on another device, right? That also brings with it cross ecosystem, right? I am very proud that I use one device from every ecosystem. I have a Mac laptop, Windows desktop, Android phone, and an iPad. And I can sign in across all of those with a passkey on any of those devices, right? So that was super important. This could never be a play where it only works in one ecosystem and you can't sign in here. It had to work cross-device. So that's something called cross-device authentication. That's kind of the friendly name we've been giving it when describing it. And that's an enhancement to one of the FIDO protocols that allows that to work. And the last piece, which is, we've traditionally kind of treated as a minor thing, is the name and the icon, right? Giving relying parties a toolkit to have a sign in with a passkey button, and also an autofill UI that provided by the browser, right? Users are very familiar, if they do use a password manager, with this little thing that pops down when they click into a username field and all of their passwords are there. How can we do that for passkeys? Well, that was an enhancement on the browser side and the platform to actually allow that UI to pop up with passkeys that the user may already have on that device, right? Because one of the challenges, if you've done federated sign-in, I mean, I'm guilty of it, and I like to think I understand this stuff. You'll go and, you signed in with Google 5 years ago, and then you go to click sign in with Microsoft the next time, and you realize you clicked the wrong one, right? So discoverability is like hugely problematic, and you don't want to get to a point where you're constantly clicking this button, and you realize you either don't have a passkey or you have one on the wrong device, or it's just a mess. So being able to provide that information upfront to the user makes it incredibly usable. And for developers, it's really as simple as adding an extra tag to your username field, and then that the platform and the browser work together to populate that, which is great from a privacy standpoint. The relying party does not get disclosed any information until the user actually clicks.
Thank you. And the reason why I asked that question up front was because, well, I think there is a little confusion in the marketplace around what passkeys are. And just to be clear that it isn't, a new spec or a new standard from the FIDO Alliance, but it's just a, new credential type and an extended set of capabilities to allow for scale. So thank you, Tim. That was very thorough.
My mouth got dry. I was like, it's time to stop talking.
But I want to just kind of go back to the sort of the market imperative for phishing resistant authentication, so the FIDO model, and for Christian on kind of the industry side, and then Andy and Paul. So Paul didn't mention that he spent some time in NIST, so we're gonna ask for his thoughts from a government perspective from when he was there back in the day. Which is, like what the sort of acknowledgement by industry that the sort of legacy forms of MFA are no longer sufficient, and and the emergence of FIDO with phishing resistant MFA. Why? I mean, I'm using the word phishing, so I feel like I'm baiting for an answer, but what were we seeing, and why was there a market imperative for this, and then now for passkeys?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I alluded to this a little bit earlier, right? We've been on this journey for a long time. Our journey with FIDO, or at least the precursor to what today we have in terms of like FIDO, the U2F standard, and now FIDO2, actually started back in 2009 when Google had an event and there was phishing, and essentially, what happened last year, happened in 2009 to a bunch of companies, right? Google being one of them. And we vowed that we don't want to have phishing cause issues for us internally ever again after that. And that's where Google's journey with FIDO and with the technology started. We wanted to develop a technology which at the tech layer solved phishing, right? We don't want to depend on users having to figure out whether something is phishing or not phishing. I know that's a big thing still. That doesn't really work, right? And I think we have some data, actually, maybe as an aside on that. I think Andrew said something a little bit earlier, percentage of users, like, who falls for phishing. We have data. If you send users a, phishing email or a message that looks good, and there's some time that goes into crafting that, 46% of users will fall for that phishing attempt. Not 2%, not 3%, 46, right? So for us, it was clear that we needed a technological solution to this problem, and that's where we started. Over time, we deployed this technology internally. Then we decided this is so cool, we want the rest of the world to be able to use it as well, and we exposed security key support for Google users. But in essence, we were still bound by having physical hardware in a user's possession, an additional thing that they have to manage and buy and think about. So to get the scale that we wanted, we really had to wait for powerful processing devices to be in everyone's pocket. And hey, that's what we have in the smartphone today. In 2009, it wasn't completely a surefire bet yet that is where we were going to end up, but we're glad that is where the world moved to. So to kind of get back to Megan's question, phishing resistance has always been the number one thing for us when we think about why we're on this journey. However, it's interesting. We've done a lot of research, a lot of UXR, user experience research on this topic. How do we present Passkeys to users? How do we present FIDO to users? How do we get users to engage? They don't care about phishing resistance. They don't really care that much about security, right? They care about ease of use. They care about simplicity. They care about getting in as quickly as they can. So our value proposition around FIDO and Passkeys to users is going to center around, this is going to be fast. This is going to be easy. If you think about using Face ID or Touch ID on an Apple device, right? I've got an iPhone right here. That's how it gets presented to users in apps all the time, right? You sign into an application, the app says, hey, do you want to just use your face next time? It's about simplicity, not about security. Because remember, you can always fall back. If you don't want to use Face ID or Touch ID today, cancel out and type your password. So there is no security benefit to using it. It's a usability benefit. So for us, presenting this as a usability enhancement is going to be critical. But then the real business reason why we're doing this internally really is to finally get rid of phishing. We have multi-factor technology, of course, at Google. The one that we recommend, that we want to push most users to, our most advanced version today, outside of Passkeys and FIDO and security keys, essentially, is what we call Google Prompt. So you sign into a Google account. If we think something looks risky, or you're a multi-factor user, we'll send a push notification to a phone. There's a lot of things that we can do around that technology, but ultimately it's still phishable. And at our scale, that technology is being phished. Users are getting phished with multi-factor, with push-based multi-factor turned on. That's the pinnacle. That's the top end of what exists in mainstream MFA today, is push-based, application-based multi-factor. So we see that happening. It's no longer theoretical. It's not like, oh yeah, SMS, OTP, of course, OTPs are phishable. No, push-based multi-factor authentication, which is kind of like the top end of what we've got today, that is being actively abused. And we need to find a solution. And we think FIDO is the alternative. And with Passkeys, as Tim said, finally we have the usability improvements that we required to actually make this a real thing going forward for our users.
Thank you. And just to touch on the usability of the actual experience of Passkeys, Andrew mentioned we have this focus on usability, with our UX committee, and they're starting to commence research around the optimal flows, prompts, terminology around the passkey experience. So we're excited to get that started and kind of see, what the users' kind of feedback gives us. And then on the government side, Andrew also had some great slides around sort of the evolving acknowledgement from government about the distinction between sort of legacy MFA and phishing resistant MFA, which kind of came to light with 63-3 and has evolved even further with 63-4. So I was hoping that you two at the end could help us out with sort of the thinking around how your thoughts evolved, because Paul was an author for 63-3, and Andy's of course an author on the 4 draft.
So, I mean, I'll say, like, first of all, I mean, the government is not that much different than the private sector. We have, constituents accessing public services too, where both security and user experience are paramount. It also means that we need to be able to support a broad range of users. The government has also had policies mandating multi-factor authentication. What that's meant in many cases, as a kind of a least common denominator, is deployment of things like SMS-based one-time passwords. And while some multi-factor authentication is better than no multi-factor authentication, we really do see the need to be able to support stronger phishing-resistant methods. So, we saw, changes now both at the policy level and the technical guidelines level with this in mind. OMB last year released their zero trust strategy, and M2209 mandating public facing use cases include a phishing resistant option. And in the new draft of 863-4, we really have increased focus on phishing resistance, kind of extending the previous notion of what was called at that point verifier impersonation resistance to more directly accommodate some of these new technologies that we're seeing today, like WebAuthn and Passkeys. Also on the federal enterprise side, there for our federal users, for our federal employees and contractors, we've been lucky to have a phishing resistant option there in our PIV cards. But there we've seen, as I think Andrew noted, that there has been challenges in some environments and in some use cases at using that, whether it's using a smart card based form factor with my mobile phone, or whether it's in the services that we see, the commercial services that we use. And so another area that we're working on is in being able to accommodate other types of phishing resistant authenticators for our federal users, being able to kind of take advantage of the strong proofing that we have under the PIV program, but then be able to use other types of phishing resistant authenticators.
Yeah, I mean, from a history perspective, when we were looking at 3, I kind of had 2 hats. I came out of NSTIC, so it was very consumer focused, industry focused. Write a standard or a special pub that was outcome based and could kind of live while technology evolved, but still be relevant. And focus on, we were focusing on high assurance consumer use cases. And FIDO played very, very nicely in there, which is why we were able to, in some circumstances, get some FIDO credentials up to the AAL level 3. And that's kind of a segue into the other hat that I wore, which some people thought I was trying to kill the PIV, but it was not kill the PIV. It was bring alternatives to the ecosystem. And FIDO answered the mail there as well, because I'm sure those that represent federal agencies here probably don't want to admit this, but what were agencies doing when they couldn't give a PIV to somebody? Password. And they'd get an exception, and OMB would turn their head. And there was no good alternative to those PIVs. So, reasonably put the PIV in their hand. Well, we wanted to do more. So, security keys at the time, but I'm really excited. This is a good segue into the rest of this panel. I'm really excited about what FIDO is doing today. And I stepped out of identity for a little while. And it was good to see this because, with Passkeys, the usability and the user adoption rates there, it breaks my heart, but consumers aren't adopting security keys. They're not adopting Google Authenticator. They're not adopting 2-factor. At least my numbers don't show that. And we have, I think, 1 billion logins a month. So we're excited to see Passkeys as that replacement. and to see the adoption numbers skyrocket and reduce friction while increasing security, which is, I think, the goal of any security practitioner up here.
Thank you, because now I won't have to ask you why Amazon's excited about Passkeys, because you just told us, so thank you. I want to kind of pivot over to something about just the sort of technical, the storage of Passkeys. So Tim, when you were describing Passkeys, you're like, oh, I like an experience like a password manager. So like folks use like their operating system kind of built in password manager, or they use like a third party, like a Dashlane kind of a password manager. So what is the role going to be for those third party providers in a Passkeys world?
Yeah, absolutely. We firmly believe that this was the second plan to this was always to bring in third parties, right? The platforms had features available today. Windows Hello, Android had full biometric framework, Apple had iCloud keychain, right? That was easy, right? We already had it. We needed to extend it, clean up some UI, and now we have this amazing solution. The next step that we're venturing into right now is actually opening that up. So what we call a password manager today, we're calling them pluggable passkey providers, most likely the technical name. We want to provide a way for them to securely plug into the operating system, right? A lot of things get done today via ways we don't love. So we believe we need to make it super easy for them to natively plug into an operating system and hand off some of the functionality to those providers, right? So, you'll maybe, for example, you'll still get Windows Hello, but ultimately you'll then get a Dashlane experience after you click something, right? So there's some things we believe should be provided by the platform, like biometric framework. But ultimately we think the passkey providers, if the user chooses to use them, should be able to plug in and be a first-party citizen into the operating system. And so Microsoft, we will be doing that with Windows. Can't commit to any timelines here, but we are, we're committed to doing that. Did you want to add anything for Google?
Yeah, the only thing that I'll briefly say, there we go, 5 seconds delay. The only thing I'll briefly add here is that, yes, we're committed, right? We've publicly said, there was a blog post at some point last year when we announced some of this functionality around Passkeys on Android that, yes, in 2023, we will add support for third parties. I do acknowledge that adding support for third parties brings with it additional complexity, though, right? Because today, if you use passkeys on Apple devices, you know what you're getting, right? You're getting a passkey, and Apple has publicly said the passkey is end-to-end encrypted, and they've also said that all their users using passkeys have multi-factor authentication turned on. I think that is something that they've also said. So anyone getting a passkey from an Apple device know how to reason about the level of security and the provenance kind of attached to that passkey. Same goes for Android today. If you're on Android, you get a passkey, you kind of know what you get. The moment we open this up to third parties, which we're definitely doing, but at that point in time, what you're getting back, Dashlane, 1Password, LastPass, pick your favorite provider, they might all have slightly different security properties, ways of doing login, ways of doing encryption, ways of recovering accounts. So I think that is where we're really soliciting also feedback from industry as which of these things are important. Like, should we surface some of this information? Should there be, there's something that we've not figured out completely yet, but something we're open to and discussing inside of the FIDO Alliance right now is, should there be some minimum bar, right? What are the sets? Like, does it map to AAL levels? Like, what happens? Like, I think that is the complexity. And that's one of the reasons why we introduced it first. Kind of the easy one was, okay, let's just get a baseline implementation out there that works. The very next thing we want to do is we want to open it up. But with the opening up, I think it would be great if we had some ideas around what relying parties, what industry needs, so that they can reason about these different things. I mean, at some level, we have folks saying, well, it's all better than passwords, so just accept everything. And that might very well be true for a large population, right? For a large size of relying parties. But there might be others where there is a requirement that needs to be satisfied. And the question is, what is the minimum set of information? What is the minimum bar, the minimum thing that we have to do to be able to get those relying parties to also adopt the system?
Thank you. So you can feedback directly to Christian. We'll give you his email address after the panel. They thought I was kidding. It's funny.
Just what I mean. I think it's just important. That is probably the top thing we're thinking about for 2023, right? We're starting to see passkey usage increase. The password managers that you may have seen join the FIDO Alliance
Yeah.
in like full force, right? When this happened, we were seeing the announcements every week. And so this is top of mind. And I want to thank the password managers that are out there for engaging, for challenging us, they're super engaged now, which is really awesome.
Yeah, it's really important that like it's clear that these are active conversations happening within the FIDO Alliance and outside of it as well. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about use cases. So Paul touched on some of the benefits of passkeys that make it appropriate for large scale consumer deployments. And like, for example, PayPal is in the midst of rolling out passkeys. Yahoo Japan has rolled out. Docomo is going to roll out. So these are larger scale consumer bases. So I think it's fair to agree that passkeys, are appropriate for that environment. But what I wanted to ask was about those environments within like enterprise, for example, or those environments that require higher levels of security at times, or for certain individuals within the enterprise. What's the your current thinking? And I'll start with Andy around the appropriateness of passkeys in those kind of environments. And the question applies to the synced, so not device bound passkeys, but those that sync across OS.
Yeah. So, I mentioned earlier, right, that phishing resistant authenticators and authentication are, a very critical focus. So, we want to be able to make use of these new innovations like passkeys across both our public facing use cases as well as our internal enterprise use cases. As part of the new draft digital identity guidelines that we put out, we've taken some steps to I'll say, try to accommodate the syncing of credentials between devices. But this is one of those areas where I think we've made some changes right now, but we're really interested in getting feedback from the implementers and the users on, first of all, are we addressing the right technical issues, and are we in the right way, and are there other things that we should be bringing up? And I say this because this notion of syncing starts to change some of the foundational expectations that we had for cryptographic and physical authenticators, where it was like possession of a device that was what you were verifying. And now it's not quite that anymore. So we're looking at, all right, what are the characteristics now between, say, what are you getting now when there's credentials that can sync between different devices that might belong to the same devices that belong to the same user? But then also, what are the characteristics now if someone can go and share one of those credentials with a completely different user? Generally that would be something that would, like the process of, say, enrolling or onboarding some additional authenticator would be between, say, the user and the relying party application or the verifier. But in this case, now that they're kind of out of the loop there, so we're, I think all of the building blocks are there to be able to accommodate this, but a lot of this is ultimately going to come down to how we see the ecosystem evolving and where we see the implementations going. We're very interested in, not just using the device-bound tokens, but also, say, the extensions that allow you to give some signal that a credential has been synced and is now being used on a new device. So having that as an option that that would be available for relying parties to use to establish their own policy, to get a little bit of that, I guess, control back for them to be able to make the decisions that make sense for them given their use case. But I think those are kind of, that's bigger than just what's an 863, but ultimately, where are we going to see the services and implementations, go and evolve.
That's great insights. So Christian and Tim are also relying parties in addition to being platform providers. So I just was wondering if either of you had a perspective you wanted to share on just use cases and appropriateness for different environments.
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak a little to the conversations we're actually trying to have with Azure AD enterprise customers, right? Outside of federal enterprise, I will make the argument and stand by it that every organization has a group of users where a passkey by itself is more than adequate for what they're doing today, right? You could drop that in. We've traditionally, when we look at how people configure FIDO and their tenants and like they show us what their policies are, right? Like it's very much a binary thing, right? We got to do it for everyone or we got to do it for no one. We have to get away from that. We have to start looking at these assurance levels and does your person who just needs to access their paycheck that doesn't have access to any other electronic services from your organization, do you really need to buy them a security key, or is a pass key good enough for that user, right? So we're trying to like restart the conversations I've been having for a decade, but that maybe come to fork that conversation into different paths, right? We're thinking about this also from the standpoint of if you have users today that are using a password and then you're doing something else, which is probably the more common use case across enterprise, right? Password plus some kind of push, number match, whatever it may be, even just replacing the password with a passkey and still doing that results in a better user experience, right? So like I think we probably, when we came into this, had this pipe dream that you would never need any other factor on top of this for all use cases. That's obviously not true in these higher security organizations, but dropping in passkey as it sits today, and you can leave that other stuff in place as we work through, like, how can we get you to a point where a passkey by itself is enough, right? That's the evolution piece of this, because we're really in, from a spectrum standpoint, we're really in this interesting gap between fully unmanaged devices accessing a service and then fully managed devices, right? There's this gap in the middle, which is very problematic. If you've ever worked in enterprise with MDMs, like, even the MDMs have gotten better. I hate using the word because people are allergic to it. But the MDM has gotten better, right? There's Android work profile where the company doesn't have any access to the rest of your device. What can we do in those areas as well? Like, could we give some more hardware bound signals only in the case where it's a quote unquote enterprise relying party and you need that assurance, but allow a regular synced passkey to your consumer account to still work for other cases, right? So it's really, it's complex, as everyone in this room knows, and we're just trying to restart that conversation because it kind of came to a halt at one point where it's like, oh, there's no way we're going to deploy FIDO to our whole organization. So
I'll say something briefly here. For like Tim addressed this mainly from kind of like security and compliance perspective. I'm going to look at it slightly from a different perspective of usability. I mean, there is a lot of questions around, will this really be easier for users to use, right? I mean, this technology is, I don't want to say unproven, but right, it hasn't been deployed at scale yet, not at least not at the level of passwords and other things. So the question is like, I mean, how big should the bet be in 2023 that we put on this stuff, right? I think for us, we're looking at kind of like, for lack of a better word, like the no-brainer stuff, right? That is, if you have a passkey already on a device and it is there and it's ready to use, don't serve a password, serve the passkey prompt. What does that mean? It tells the user to touch their fingerprint or show their face. Any user today, I want to say, any user with a modern smartphone today is used to that experience, right? They get confronted with it when they open their banking application or any application that needs constant re-authentication, right? They're used to that already. How do we present that to a user? I mean, I think there's, again, work that FIDO is doing in our user experience, like the UX working group, in how do we message this to users? Because now suddenly this experience is available on web, where it traditionally has only been like an app-based thing, but those are minor details. I think for us in 2023, we should get out the door the mechanism to use a passkey whenever it's available to a user. It should just be served when it's there. The harder one to wrap our heads around a little bit is the cross-device experiences, right? What if I'm on a device and I don't have a passkey yet, right? But I'm maybe the user has a corresponding Android phone that does have a passkey, right? When should we surface the passkey experiences? In what way? I mean, folks have probably seen, but there's some QR codes involved. There's scanning. 2023 is the year where we'll learn a lot about like how hard should we push those things. Remember, users today already in most circumstances have to go grab their phone anyway when they log in on a new device. A password is no longer enough to give a user a secured session. We need to get them an SMS to their phone, or we might need to send a push notification to a device anyway. So I think sometimes we're kind of like wrapping ourselves around the axle and saying, well, but yesterday it was just a password that was auto-entered. Now I have to go grab my phone. You already have to go grab your phone today for most high assurance, use cases. So that's the thing that I think we're trying to figure out this year. But there are definitely 60 to 70% of use cases today that can and should be addressed by Passkeys because it's just a pure no-brainer win, I think, in terms of UX.
Yeah, but I think the user experience and even I think the security benefits of having say embedded credentials that you can use are very real. I mean, we all probably in this room have a device that's probably accessing our email, that's always online, always connected. Having some ability to then be able to very quickly and easily authenticate to get back to our, whether it's personal services or our enterprise services, is really useful. So I mean, I think I've long been very interested in using those embedded platform authenticators, as you call them, even high assurance applications. I think there is a role for them in many environments. It's not always good. I don't think it needs to be I don't think there needs to be a separation, say, between platform embedded credentials or passkeys versus external USB security keys. Like I think they both have a role in public-facing environments and in enterprise environments.
And just a quick comment, keying off something Christian said. The interesting thing about the cross-device flow is it long-term for consumers is a very temporary thing, right? Like we imagine like 5 years from now when you have a passkey on all your devices, the only time you're using the cross-device flow is you're signing in on a friend's device or you're signing into a kiosk like at the airport where there's some secured thing where you need to sign in. Like once a user has a passkey, if they decide to use the platform's passkey provider, once they have one in each provider, that's kind of the end, right? They don't need to do that anymore. And if they're using a third-party passkey manager, even better, they may never do cross-device flow. So it's actually challenging to measure in many ways because some of these are also temporary, right? Because they're new. So we have to pay a lot of attention to how long these experiences will last and how often the users will see them.
I think that's a good place to wrap. And because Jeremy's going to get the hook out in a minute, but I say that because you say, because it's new and just to remind folks, this is new days and discussions are being had and this needs to be iterated on and the feedback is really appreciated and discussions like this are fantastic as well. So please just help me to thank our panelists for joining me today.
Thanks to our moderator.